together as a church and proclaim and know and be unified in the fact that everything good comes from God. And that name, the person that He gave us, Jesus, His Son, He came to die for us. He came to save us. His grace is above all measure. His grace is available for you and for me today. Let's proclaim His name, the name above all other names, the name of Jesus.
read the Gospel today. And it's a bit of a long one. We're going to tackle the whole of Mark chapter 5. So if you want to just read along with me, we'll do it together. So Mark chapter 5, page 994 in the Pew Bibles. Verse 1. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." But Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding around you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. When the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, she told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion, with the people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in to where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately, the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. For the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Now, that was a bit of a long one this morning, and we are going to tackle the whole thing, but I want to sort of storytell through it this morning because I want us to meet three characters. But first, before we get into that, maybe it's my youth group leader in me, but I'll give you a test. Who remembers what happened 2 weeks ago? I'll give you a name. We talked about Stephen. 2 weeks ago we talked about Stephen. We've met this ordinary man who was willing to engage with God, and he was willing to engage with people, and he was willing to engage with what God was doing with those people. We saw that when we live this out, it looks like a mustard plant. This mustard plant that is a bush, and it's a scraggly looking bush, not glorious looking, but it starts and it weaves its way around all the other plants in the garden, sort of like lantana, and it gets in there, and you don't notice it's there until it takes over, and then it's hard to get out. Jesus used this illustration. This is what the kingdom of God looks like. It's like a mustard plant. Last week, the passage followed on from that. So it said that after he finished teaching these parables, he hopped in the boat with his disciples and they went across the lake. And while they were out on the lake, this storm rose up. And the disciples were afraid. Jesus was taking a nap downstairs. And Stu asked this question: why do we follow Jesus? Why do we follow Jesus? Is it just because of the blessings? Is it just because he gives us good things? Or is it because of who he is? And like you reminded us this morning, is it because he's good and he's worthy and he is God? Why do we follow Jesus? Last week I asked the youth group, we were having a discussion about this, and I just asked them, what was the main concern of Jesus on the boat? And we discovered that Jesus' main concern was not the wind and the waves, and it wasn't even the fact that he could stop them in an instant. Jesus wasn't concerned about that. He was concerned about the hearts of the disciples. He was concerned about their faith. And as we discussed that, we realised that what Jesus is really after is our hearts. He's not concerned about the wind and the waves. He's concerned about our hearts and our faith. Today's passage, today's gospel reading follows on from that. So the storm's finished and they arrive on the bank of the river, lake on the other side. And I got so excited about today's message because I just feel like I can totally relate to it. As we meet these three characters, I feel like I can totally relate to them. Because I was just reminded, as I read this story, about Jesus' relentless pursuit of me. And I remember that first time I realised that, I was looking for Jesus, and I was looking for Jesus, and I was looking for Jesus, and the moment that I stopped, I realised he'd been relentlessly pursuing me for years and years. He never stopped, and he continues to not stop. And I was so amazed, and I could totally relate to where these people were at. And I know that as we go through this today, many of you will also be able to relate to these people in the story. So let's hop into the text again. At the start of Mark chapter 5. And I'm just going to sort of story tell through this because we've already read it. But in verse 2, this man with an impure spirit comes to meet Jesus. Jesus has landed on the shore, but this man with an impure spirit, or impure spirits, comes to meet Jesus. We see that this is a tortured man. He asked Jesus not to torture him, but it's obvious from the story that this man is already tortured. He cries out day and night and cuts himself with stones. It says in Luke, when it tells the same story, that this man had been naked for many, many years, and it had been many, many years since he lived in a house. He lived among the graveyard, he lived in the tombs. This was a tortured man. A hopeless situation. Hopeless situation. we see that Jesus casts out this evil spirit, these impure spirits, this legion of spirits. And the thing that got me thinking was, I was trying to picture it in my mind, and this man is naked, and he's bleeding, and he's completely out of his mind. And a period of time passes between Jesus casting out these demons and the townspeople arriving, finding him clothed and in his right mind. And I was thinking, I don't know how long that time was, how long it takes to get from where they were to the village and the surrounding countryside to tell all the people. Half an hour, a couple of hours, an afternoon, I don't know. But I just got to thinking, Jesus didn't just heal him and take off. There was an engagement there. Jesus healed him and he cast out his spirits, and it said the man was clothed, and I thought, well, maybe Jesus and the disciples clothed him. I don't know, like we don't know these things from the text, but I was just thinking to myself, I wonder what this conversation went like. And maybe it was something like Jesus sitting down on a rock with him next to him after clothing him. Maybe washing his face, washing his feet, and just saying, man, that was tough, wasn't it? That was a tough spot to be. But don't worry, you're safe now. You're healed. Go in peace. Go and see your family. Tell them of what God's done for you. And I just sort of imagined Jesus just sitting casually next to him on a rock, just having this conversation. After the townspeople come, it says that Jesus hops back in the boat and heads back across the lake where he came from. And then I got to thinking as well, did Jesus just travel across the lake to meet this one guy? Gets on his boat, goes across, gets stuck in a storm, gets to the other side, meets one person, hops on his boat, goes back across to where he came from. But did he really go across that lake just to meet this one person? And my answer to that was probably. Because again, I was thinking about my own story, and I was thinking, man, Jesus came across that lake for me. He went completely out of his way. I was running to the other side of the world. I was as far away as I could have been. And Jesus went completely out of his way to relentlessly pursue and engage with me. And I thought that was so cool, and I could so relate to that man's story because Jesus went out of his way to meet him. We see in verse 21, if you still want to follow along. They arrive on the shore and a large crowd gathered around him. I was picturing this again. I was picturing Jesus sort of getting off this boat and maybe he had some quiet time on the boat where he'd been able to put his feet up and maybe take another nap, and no storm had happened this time, but he gets off the boat and this crowd is pressing around him and everyone wants to see Jesus. And all of a sudden this man Jairus, pushes his way through and falls at the feet of Jesus, and he's like, Jesus, it's hopeless. My daughter is dying. I am in a hopeless situation. It just says that Jesus went with him. It doesn't say, well, how far is your house away? How old's your daughter? Have you had a doctor come? Yeah, it just says Jesus went with him. And as Jesus is walking, this woman's there. And this woman is in another hopeless situation. She's been bleeding for 12 years and she's spent all her money on doctors and trying to get better. And instead of making it better, it's got worse. This lady's in a hopeless situation and she comes and she thinks to herself, if I can just touch his clothes, if I can just get close enough, I'll be healed. I know that this is the man that can heal me. Immediately, she was healed. Jesus realized that his power had gone out of him. And he stopped and he turned and he asked the question, who touched my clothes? And we read that the disciples are like, Jesus, dude, are you serious? Like, you see, like we can't even move here. There's people everywhere. And you're asking who touched my clothes? I love verse 32 where it says, Jesus kept looking for her. There's people everywhere. He knows something's happened. He knows a healing's taken place. And Jesus kept looking for her. In verse 33, the woman falls at his feet, trembling with fear. Such an important part of this story. Jesus asks, who touched my clothes? And as Sarah said to the kids before, was he angry? No. Was he power hungry? Was he offended that some lady had just come up and touched him wanting to get healed? He stopped and kept looking for her because he wanted to engage with her. He wanted to meet her. And I think that is so, so beautiful. In verse 34, when this lady is fallen at his feet, and again, these crowds pressing in, there's people everywhere, there's probably goats everywhere, it's probably stinky. Jesus maybe didn't even have time for a bathe in the lake when he got out, but there's people everywhere, and he says to this lady, daughter, daughter. Jesus uses this beautiful, intimate, family language to refer to this outcast of society, this lady who is completely outcast because of her sickness. She can't stop bleeding. In that time and culture, you're outcast of that stuff. You're not just oh look, there's Mary, she's bleeding. But she's probably an outcast. And Jesus says to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. I think that is so cool. He looks for her, he keeps looking, he follows her, and he says, daughter, you're okay. Go and be freed. In verse 35, we see that some people come to Jairus from his household. And in the meantime, while Jesus has been having this encounter and engaging with this lady, Jairus' daughter has died. Jairus, who came to Jesus in a hopeless situation, has taken another turn for the worse. Now it is completely hopeless. Some translations say that Jesus overhears them say this. But I love that our Pew Bible says Jesus ignores them. Jesus ignores the people that are saying this girl is dead and says, don't be afraid, just believe. Those words might ring in your ears from our message last week. The disciples are in the midst of the storm, and Jesus says, don't be afraid, have faith. Don't be afraid, have faith. In verse 37, we see that this language, and we see the picture, it changes from this amazing group of people pressing around Jesus to this intimate moment. Because Jesus allows no one to follow him except for Peter, James and John. He sends everyone out of the house. He takes Jairus, his wife and his 3 disciples into the room with the little girl. And it's become this intimate family moment. Jesus takes the girl by the hand and speaks softly to her. Little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately, this 12-year-old girl stands up and begins to walk around. I was reminded of the story about the centurion who had the sick servant, the Roman soldier. And he comes to Jesus and he says, Jesus, you don't have to come to my house. I know that you can just do this from afar. And it says that, if you remember the story, but Jesus says, okay, your faith has made him well. And Jesus doesn't see the servant, he doesn't touch the servant, but the servant's completely restored and healed. And I was thinking to myself, well, Jesus could have just done the same thing again. He could have said, well, your daughter's going to die in, I don't know how long, but she's well, and you've come to me in faith, and she's healed. It's all good. But I was picturing this moment, and I thought it was so cool and so beautiful that Jesus wanted to engage with this family. It wasn't just about the healing, Even though the healing power of Jesus is amazing in this story, it wasn't just about the healing, but it was about Jesus wanting to engage with them. Often in the scriptures we see that things are repeated 3 times. And the writers do this as a way of emphasis. And this story, these 3 stories, the healing power of Jesus is repeated 3 times in the most miraculous ways. The evil spirits are cast out, the lady is restored, and her physical body is healed, and this girl is raised from the dead. The healing power of Jesus is amazing. But in all 3 stories as well, it's repeated that Jesus wanted to engage with individuals. Because often we can think about it as Jesus loves the church, or Jesus wants to engage with our church, and he wants to engage with our community. But I'm reminded again that Jesus wants to engage with me. He wants to engage with the individual. He wants to engage with you, and you, and you, and you. He wants to engage with individuals. Just to wrap it up, I want to finish with 3 points. And if you're taking notes, write these ones down. I like 3 points. It's easy for me to remember. The first one that I realised as I was going through these 3 stories is that without Jesus, all 3 of these people were in a hopeless situation. All 3 of these people were in a hopeless situation. And I was reminded and humbled. Without Jesus, I was in a hopeless situation. It wasn't my physical, it wasn't my mental, it wasn't that I was in a hopeless situation of money or anything like that, but I needed a saviour. I knew that there was nothing I could do, no good things that I could do that was going to make my sins go away. Nothing I could do was going to restore my relationship with God. I was in a hopeless situation. So without Jesus, all 3 people were in a hopeless situation. Number 2, all 3 people intentionally went to Jesus and fell at his feet. And I just thought that was so cool. Because to acknowledge our need for Jesus is an amazing act of humility. To even acknowledge that we need a saviour is such a humble act. It really is. And to invite Jesus into our hopeless situations is an act of surrender. Jesus, I lay it down at your feet. Jesus, I'm here and I'm broken and I surrender. Finally, I allow you to take hold of my life and make it into something worthwhile. And that was my prayer in 2010 when I gave my heart to Jesus. That was my actual words. Jesus, I have made a very, very big mess. If you can do anything with what I've got left. My aspirations for work, my desire for a wife, my financial needs, I've tried. Jesus, I need you. And I surrender it and I fall at your feet. And that's the essence of worship. We gather here on a Sunday and we worship God. We're just saying, I put you at number 1. I lift you high and I worship you because of who you are. Not because I want something from you, not because I believe that you're going to tick off my shopping list of needs and desires and wants, because you are who you are. And you're great and you're wonderful. Number 3, and this is the kicker. This is the one. Jesus wanted to engage with them. Jesus desired to engage with them. So often we can think that we're the ones that want God, or God, I want you, I want more of you, I want you. And like I shared in my story, the moment that I stopped, I just realised that Jesus had been relentlessly pursuing me. He desired me. He desires you. He wants to engage with you. And that is so cool. He wanted to engage with all 3 of these people in the story today. I think that is so cool. Jesus wants to engage with us. What does that look like? Number 2, again, just stood out to me. It takes us being intentional. It takes us being intentional. I can want to be with Jesus with all my desire, but unless I'm intentional and I set aside time in my day to sit and be with him, I get to the end of my day and I'm like, oh man, Jesus, I really wanted to be with you today, and I wanted to encounter you and I wanted to engage with you, and now it's time for bed, another day has gone past. And I was just reminded that it requires us to be intentional. That intentionality, I think, looks like 2 things. It looks like prayer. It looks like prayer. It looks like a regular quiet time. For some, that might be a morning, some it might be at night. For me, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you call me at 3 in the afternoon, I don't pick up. Don't try and call again. It's a quiet time. And I'm jealous for that. And if I don't have it, I realise and I know that I haven't had it. And I'm like, man, I'm missing something so incredible in my life right now. This quiet time and this prayer involves listening. Not just talking, but listening. Jesus wants to speak. He wants to say, daughter, I see you. My son, I'm here. I get where you're at. He wants to speak into those situations. He wants to hear our hearts, but he also wants to speak. It looks like getting into our Bibles. It really looks like getting into our Bibles. The Word of God is alive and it's active, and it has the power to transform heart and mind. It has the power to transform heart and mind more than any sermon I could deliver to you. It's incredible. The Word of God, it's alive. That might be scary. I don't know how. It's confusing. It's all muddled up. I never could have got any of that stuff out of my Bible reading. You know what? There's so many small groups. So many small groups. We do our masterclass on a Thursday afternoon. There's things, and Stuart, my desire is to help and to encourage and to equip you guys to be able to read your Bibles, to be able to pray, to equip and excite and encourage you guys into a relationship with Jesus, in which he can engage with you and you can engage with him. This was a timely reminder for me. I enjoy preaching because I know that God's got to do the work in my heart before I can even begin to talk. And it's just an amazing reminder for me this week that Jesus wants to engage with me. He does, he desires me. He's been relentlessly pursuing me. And he's relentlessly pursuing each and every one of you guys. Heavenly Father, we just take a breath. Just take a breath and we breathe out ourselves and we breathe out our fears and anxieties, and Lord God, we just invite you in. Father, would you engage with us? Would you meet us where we're at? Would you meet us in our fears? Would you meet us in our anxieties? Would you meet us in our concerns? Would you meet us in our joys and our laughter? And Father, I just pray for these guys this week. That they would see you, that they would know you, that they would engage with you. Father, we thank you that you're a good God. That you're a loving God, you're a kind God. You're not power hungry, you're not wanting to push around, but you're wanting to engage. And we just love you so much, Lord God, and we just give you all the glory this morning. We pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Our studies are written by pastors and teachers actively growing their local church. These studies have been a blessing to churches across many denominations and around Australia. These 7-week practical studies are designed to meet people in their everyday lives and encourage them to grow in faith. Our prayer is that you or your church will be blessed by growing in relationship with our God through studying His Word. You can purchase these studies individually or for groups online.